Patty, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good.
Can you hear me okay? It doesn't sound like it's a back.
Well, as okay as these platforms are. Yes, I can hear fine. I hope everyone can too.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back on mute.
Okay.
Steve, Alan, I assume you can hear us too, and you will kick off the meeting when you're ready.
I do see Steve just joined us and is putting in his headphones, so I'm sure he'll pipe in a second. Thanks.
Sure.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank President Garamella and Provost Prelock for joining us today. And I guess without further ado, and Gary, you're here as well. Good morning, Gary. Thank you for joining us. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to President Garamella and Provost Prelock. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve, Caleb, Alan, all of you for pulling this group together. The Staff Council is very important to me. As you know, we all met a while back at our home, and not sure when we can do that again in a crowd like that, but I hope we can make that happen sooner than later, even maybe with some social distancing and outdoors. Look, folks, I know this is a difficult time. We all do. And the kinds of decisions we're needing to make are necessary for the university's financial future. They have impacts that are hard on everyone. I understand that the challenge is real. The decisions we're making are designed to protect as many jobs and employees as possible. I would like to do my very best not to let folks go. And so that's what's been driving some of the decisions we're having to make. We will get some help from the state for COVID-related expenses. We'll still have more than any help they provide, but we have to deal with the long-term impacts of COVID and the structural budget shortfalls that we have. So I just want to set that up as a stage that none of us, we would rather not be making decisions that are painful, but I do want to thank you all of our staff, for all that you're contributing at this difficult time to keep us all safe, functional, operational, and look forward to this conversation. I'll turn it over to Patty.
Thank you, President Garamella, and a big thank you to staff. You know how I always feel staff is the glue that keeps us together. So thank you for everything you've done, especially with all the pivoting, supporting faculty, supporting our orientation, our admitted student visit day. It's amazing what people have done through this time. What I would like to do is, President Garamella and I had a chance to look at over 60 questions that were submitted. And I tried to cluster them into categories, and so we'll try and answer as many questions today in those categories, from really understanding our common ground in communication to fairness of cuts to the campus children's school, some of the return to fall planning. Please have patience with us as we try and address them. So why don't I start off? And there was an important question at the June 9th meeting related to how salary reductions align with our common ground. And Suresh and I've thought a lot about this, because certainly our common ground guides everything that we do and as we move forward. And there's clearly no price on values, and we think about them every day as people do matter. So I think we all agree on that. So as I reflected on some of the elements of the common ground, like integrity and responsibility, I think those values have significant relevance at this difficult time. We're trying to value fairness, not cutting salaries for people at the lowest level, and using percentages so that people who make more will be giving back more. We also are trying to use facts as we know them at this point in time to guide those decisions. Ultimately, we are responsible for the fiscal viability of the institution. So we want to make sure that we have a community where everyone has a place to work and students have a place to learn. Another important one is respect, and I agree this is key, and I believe most of our members really work hard to do this. It's become challenging to have different perspectives, and I honor that. We actually heard that in our 2019 climate survey. I think what we can do is listen to your concerns about salary reductions and then continue to offer additional perspectives that create an understanding of the larger context, knowing that personally everyone is impacted and experiencing this change and disruption in a very individual way. You know, at the same time we're dealing with these reductions and challenges, we are still committed to innovation, finding new ways to generate revenue, changing practices to improve our outcomes. We're doing a lot of unique things with your help, actually, in retention and designing virtual connection spaces for our students and admitted student orientation, et cetera. Staff were really key and continue to be key in our success of all of those people, of all of those elements. And then improving our open exchange of information and ideas. I think we can improve in that area. We heard you loud and clear, and both President Garamella and I are committed to making sure we do better in this arena. And finally, I know we feel passionately about creating a just community. This is clearly a priority for all of you. We heard that in your questions. And as you know, we work closely with Wanda Heading-Grant in her new role as VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And she's becoming more engaged in the academic commitment to justice. And so she's now part of my leadership team so that we can really be addressing some core issues in the Provost's office with a diversity and justice lens. Now, there were a couple of questions also about communication, and I hear the frustration people have where people feel like we're not paying attention or disregarding how the community feels or our Black and Brown colleagues feel, and also that the announcement created significant stress with the cuts and then the delay in getting you information about retirements, furloughs. So that had to be unsettling and nerve-wracking. So to honor that, the timing of the announcement was unfortunate. We agree with that. And this crisis required us to really respond quickly and to take important and necessary steps so that we could maintain the financial health of the institution, and while also trying to remind ourselves we're here for students and for our employees. So we understand it felt very sudden, and it was important for us to give employees as much notice as we could before the new fiscal year began. But it goes back to our common ground and our effort to be more open in our communication and prepare you for this, and actually to prepare some of our managers and directors so that they can help us really prepare the community. And also, I totally agree, there couldn't be more stress at this time. From an institutional perspective, from your personal perspective, the nation's perspective. I think I've been talking to some directors and managers in my own units, as I know Suresh has as well, and we are coming up with a better approach so that supervisors and directors are more involved in helping us prepare staff for things that are likely to be totally unnerving and unsettling. I do agree, when the memo came out, we said by June 10th we would have FAQs up, and they were not, and it was another week, and delays in details are problematic, and I acknowledge that. And I think our financial services office was trying to make sure that they had all the information addressed before they sent it out to you, but we should have been clearer about that. I also think that, implementing a number of cost reduction strategies in a lot of areas is hard, and we're going to continue to explore those further. But unfortunately, we can't escape the reality that 2/3 of our budget is directed to personnel costs. So it's real difficult to balance the financial challenges and not impacting employee salaries and benefits. So we agree, and it's challenging to do that. So with that, as we talk about common ground and communication and think about that lens, there were several questions about fairness of cuts. And so I'm going to just pose some of those, and President Garamella is going to try and address those, and I will back him up with additional information. So Suresh, one of the questions that was asked is, how are we ensuring that both our represented and our non-represented staff are equally sharing the burden of new cuts?
Yeah. So Patty, thank you. Let me just also say that the way you described our common ground, again, we're taking turns to answer different questions, and I think that's the right thing to do. But I would have said everything you said. Our common ground is non-negotiable, and even though there are challenges that are really once in a lifetime, once in the university's lifetime, our common ground isn't going anywhere. So in terms of fairness then, right? So we also received, I acknowledge that we received a memo on June 30th from the Compensation, Benefits, and Budget Committee. And so I'm sharing my response here. So this is in response to that memo as well, which really is captured in a good number of questions we received in this arena through your questions. So please share this info with the staff. I know that the Staff Council leadership is planning to share some of this. So first of all, I agree, we all agree that everyone should share the burden. There are things that you may have missed or may not be aware of yet, but the LCOM faculty, the College of Medicine faculty who are not represented, will have a 5% reduction for this FY21. All administrators have taken a 5% reduction. And for many, have offered an additional 3.3% as a voluntary reduction. So there's the base 5%, and then in addition, the administrators are given back. Part of the challenge with the institution we love and work at is that we have unions and such, so we're engaged in collective bargaining. The same financial realities are being dealt with in those conversations as well. But out of respect for the ground rules, I cannot share more. I can tell you that the conversations there are not any different from what we've done for the represented staff, the non-represented staff, sorry.
Great. Suresh, there was also a question about clarifying. People are trying to understand the concept of those who make over $100,000 a year versus those in the $80,000 to $100,000 range, knowing the cost of living in Chittenden County and the Northeast in general, and how this might impact Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. So your thoughts on that one? Yeah.
So again, this is, it's really so consistent with our common ground discussion at the beginning. I think I'm glad Patty started with that. because we're all acutely aware that any of these actions are causing hardship. However, I want to say that the university is approaching these challenges that have been posed by the pandemic, but really have exacerbated issues that we already had in place in a way that supports our academic mission. And we need to save our university and ensure our financial stability into the future. So these steps that you're referring to and other steps that the university has taken, such as redistributing work that's currently performed by temporary employees and partial reduction in workload for some of our non-tenure track lecturers, are driven by our strong desire to save permanent employees' jobs. This really, I will say that as many times as this question comes up, that I will do my best, we will all do our best to save jobs. We approach these salary reductions in a manner that ensure equity with full consideration of our commitment to fairness. This is why the university has used a progressive percentage-based approach, and this approach allows us to provide special protection to our lowest paid employees who have no cut, and to assign a proportionally higher reduction as wages increase. So I think we all believe that this is indeed consistent with our institutional values.
Thank you, Suresh. The next one I'm happy to answer. It was related to a person whose FTE is actually 0.8, and they weren't necessarily expecting a reduction, and was told that the reductions occurred on 1 FTE. And actually, the percent that anyone gets applies to the reduction. It's calculated based on an annualized salary. However, the percentages only apply to your actual income, not annualized if you are less than 1.0. There were several questions about livable wage, and I think Suresh answered those. The only thing I might add is that one of the challenges we have that you may not realize for those individuals who get higher wages, they tend to be more difficult to recruit and to retain at a higher level positions. And so with more significant cuts, it's very difficult to get people in those positions. In addition, those individuals are expected to work not the typical 37.5, which I know many of you do way more than that, especially during COVID. But these are individuals who are available to Suresh and I 24/7, especially during this time and on weekends. Another question.
Patty, could I just add, yes. Sorry, I hope this is easy for people to follow, but I will say one more thing about the way we look at this. So I think UVM has for a long time been very careful about compensating people at or near the median of the competitor groups. And there are some very standard competitor groups, all the way from the president's salary down to just every salary level at every scale. And we try our best to get everyone to the median because that's what keeps us competitive to the extent that we can be. And so that is fairness. It is fairness to compare to other folks in similar jobs at other institutions and pay accordingly. So Patty, just wanted to add that because I don't know if we specifically articulated that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you raised that. The next two questions were really, Suresh, I believe, answered them, but let me just reiterate because there's some confusion about management or leadership cuts as only 1 year and not permanent, and then asking for a list. And so I want to be really clear, all management and leadership are giving up they're doing a permanent 5% cut, just like the staff. And then in addition, the only thing that's voluntary is the 3.3% for FY21. The reason I want you to make sure that you understand this is that this is considered permanent to address the university's structural budget shortfalls. The voluntary portion is just the one time, although there may be senior leaders who choose to do that again, depending on what their financial situation is. The voluntary piece is personal and individual, so I know there was a request to ask for those. I think we need to respect people's willingness to volunteer additional things, and there are several other people who've actually done significant donations to the foundation for scholarships, for technology, etc. And they don't really want people to know that. That's just their philanthropic approach. So, Suresh, the next question was about FY21 salaries being announced for faculty administrators. And is there anything you want to say? You did talk about ALCOM and faculty administrators, but timing and how it was announced, people who are in the union, those who are not, anything you want to add?
I think many of these questions clearly reflect that multiple folks on the staff council and across the community have these questions. So I think in some ways we could have combined them all into one topic, and they are. But to reiterate, all these cuts we've talked about that are base cuts, the faculty, the administrator cuts of 5% that Patty talked about, president, provost, VPs, AVPs, all that starts July 1st. It started yesterday. The additional 3.3 is voluntary, so that has also come into play. As I said, the ALCOM faculty cut is beginning July 1st. The assigned salary reductions can only apply at this point to the non-represented employees, including myself and other senior leaders. Compensation levels for represented employees are subject to collective bargaining. I think we all know that there are ground rules that go with that. So we don't know the outcome of what happens to represented folks till that process is completed. But for those cuts we've been talking about, they all went into effect July 1st.
Thank you, Suresh. I know there was an important question that was raised about families having both partners working for UVM who are truly committed. And so they're feeling double penalty. Any thoughts about how you might respond to that experience?
Yeah. So, you know, Patty, there are so many such things that I keep wishing we could just resolve more easily. But I do note that there were 40 million people or so that lost jobs around the country. The financial fallout from this pandemic is affecting all individuals and all families to a larger or smaller degree. Countless companies and institutions, certainly even within Vermont, have implemented very severe measures, including mandatory furloughs and layoffs. Our hope is that even with the salary reductions we've implemented, that they're as small as we could make them to sort of address our structural deficits, and that I'm hoping that UVM individuals and families, we're able to get them to a place where they fare better than other organizations that are struggling even more. But these are all challenging issues, and I will just say that I acknowledge them.
In case you're following the questions, I did want to let you know that I've reordered them to put them in the clusters of categories so that you feel like you're getting answers to a whole group of questions so that we can make sure we get through them. So I just wanted you to understand that. The next two questions, again, are speaking to the concern with salary cuts, but they're more related to some examples that staff gave for those individuals who are in grant-funded positions and maybe not really understanding what the expectation is. So, as you know, the salary reductions are permanent. And for non-represented faculty, we're still in negotiations, so that's yet to be determined. But we have a lot of obligations that are built in, and we can't get away from not only union contracts, but federal requirements. So for those of you who are on grants or work on grants, the federal uniform guidance governing spending on federal grants requires that these funds be used in the same way that other university funds are used without exception. We are not permitted to make adjustments even though the grant has given those dollars, because we will be out of federal compliance. You get those dollars based on here's how you're using other university funds with other individuals. So that's really not negotiable. And one of the points was made, well, then that's going to go back to the granting agency. And actually, that's not true. What can happen is working with your program officer, you can identify what is happening, and those dollars can be reassigned to meet the goals and the primary aims of the project. So the expenditures that are important to us, and the question clearly, the individual who asked that understands the importance of research expenditures, we will still be able to utilize those. And so it's a very small percentage that would not. Suresh, there's a last two questions in this category. One is looking at salaries, who, you know, people are taking cuts, but it seems like there's added responsibilities with the hiring fees. And so you understand that. So maybe we'll answer first and then we'll talk about the other.
Well, sure. Yeah, of course. I think I really do thank everyone for putting in extra effort. You know, I was checking in with, I'm doing a lot of Teams calls, check-ins with different groups, as many as I can fit in. And, you know, one of the groups yesterday was saying, this summer is like not any other summer. We normally recharge and refresh in the summer. We have less workload, and this has not been the case. So I understand. That said, right, if someone's duties change, or actually greater job responsibilities are put on an individual, and if that warrants an adjustment, or there are new supervision requirements, for instance, then you know, we will consider that. But I will say that everyone is taking on more work without additional pay right now. I dearly, dearly hope that this will be a short-term thing, that somehow things will settle down. There was a nice interview by Scott Gottlieb, the previous FDA commissioner, this morning, that, you know, he feels quite strongly that by January we should be in a better shape. So anyway, the job duties and position descriptions will be reviewed as appropriate to ensure there aren't any sort of undue changes in these things.
Thanks. The last question was in this category was related to police services receiving raises while faculty and staff are taking cuts. Again, as you may know, police services are represented and their compensation levels are determined by a union contract. So fair bargaining practices require us to follow the union contract. We don't have flexibility on that. Now, there are about 4 questions related to retirement and other benefits. And one person identified that, will early retirement be a possibility next year? Because I'm a little shy of eligibility. As I've talked with Richard, Kate, and others, this will be a continuing dynamic process. We're going to continue to assess what the ongoing challenges are to determine if we have any needed strategies. That may be one of them. We just don't know at this time. And there was a question about, are we looking to cut more benefits like tuition remission or increasing insurance costs? And I've heard that from other employees. I think that's a really important question. There's no plans at this time to do that. And someone identified they just missed the cutoff date. And because of their hiring date, unfortunately, we have to go by whatever the cutoff date is. And then the last question in this area was restructuring benefits. Was that considered before reducing job and or pay? And Suresh, I don't know if you want to share your perspective on it.
Sure. You know, if I could list all the things that we've been considering and reconsidering again and again, including with input from our community. So we've been looking at everything. Okay, and as we indicated back in May, when my first memo on this topic, it's necessary to consider both salaries and benefits because this is almost 70% of UVM's budget, which is directed at personnel costs. So it's not as if we can do a piece of this and leave the bulk of stuff. Over the years, we've had over a dozen years, I believe, there have been cuts to administrative groups and units and to support centers and so on. But the fact remains that the bulk of our expenses are in personnel costs. So we don't have that many levers.
Thank you. So the next group of questions, there were 5 that were related to vacation payout, accruals, et cetera. And people are asking important questions about this. So I want President Garamella to be able to share his perspective on how the vacation payout is a cost-saving measure in the long run. What are the implications? People felt caught off guard because eliminating it when they have earned time, how will that be managed? And people feel strongly because they've not taken vacation and instead worked to support the needs of the university. And so if you might want to just address how we think about that.
Yeah, these are all, in fact, the previous question was about, have you looked at other things before looking at cuts? So unfortunately, we have to put a whole combination of things, and we're still nowhere near where we need to be. So we're trying our best to find various ways of addressing this to cause as little pain as possible. I will say, however, that unused vacation time, I don't believe it was seen by the university as a component of monetary compensation. We'd really like employees to use vacation time, of course, in consultation with their supervisors to ensure that department functions are not jeopardized. But it's, I'd rather folks took vacation, took care of their health and their families, and not viewed this as somehow one more component of compensation. In any case, we, I guess, to make sure that there was some overlap, some time to adjust, we've extended the time for which employees can take their vacation through June 30th of next year, of 2021, and they can work with their departments to ensure staffing is met while taking the vacation. So I understand it's a tricky thing. I don't have the number handy, but we were in a situation where we had either $10 or $12 million of accrued vacation payouts that were just kind of on our books, and it seemed not at all consistent with the original intention of providing employees with vacation.
Thank you, Suresh. I think the last question in that category was a suggestion. Knowing how much work people are doing, would we ever consider a one-time extra vacation hours? And we actually very much appreciate the extra mile that staff are going, especially during this time when you have pressures at home as well. We're open to hearing these ideas, and the only thing is, for this question, we're not sure what can be done until more information about the budget is available, but we have put that on our list for consideration. So there were a couple of questions that people asked. I believe there were about 3 of them related to creating efficiencies. One was related, how might we do more central administration office efficiencies? How does the tuition freeze, why did we defer that, and should have we not done that? And then asking about the athletic campus. So I'll take the first one, and then maybe I'll have Suresh talk about the tuition freeze and how important that was to us. So we agree that we absolutely need to look for efficiencies throughout the university, and I often tease Suresh, he's always looking for efficiencies, and he has one more thing that he wants me to say, can't we cut the cost here? Can't we look at administrative pieces here? Central administrative offices are no exception, and we already have a lot of that work underway. We've decreased central and support center costs by $35 million over the last 10 years. And this year we're taking another 5% reductions in our operating costs for support centers and administration. We are trying to be more strategic, and how that will fare out. It may be that some won't take 5% and some will take 6%. I can give you an example. In the Provost's office, we're going to take a little bit more so that we can support admissions and enrollment management, because they're the revenue generators, because they can't really meet the 5%. So those are how we're trying to work through things. The Provost office is going through a reorganization to increase efficiency and create some shared services and increase service quality. We're working with Annie Stevens to do the same in student affairs. We have not hired 2 vice presidents, and we're likely one of those vice presidents we're going to change to a vice provost who will be in my office and will not have as much of the financial requirements that are typically required at a vice president level. And then I will tell you, my office and Richard's office, and then ultimately to Suresh, we are going through significant scrutiny. Many of you are experiencing this because you put requests to me, and we're looking at every single expenditure in our central offices and saying, is this essential? Do we need to do this? How is this meeting our mission? How does this serve? And to your point earlier about, gosh, we're asking people to do more for less. So I'm now saying to staff, what on your plate should we not be doing? Because it's not critical to our mission, even though we've done it for all these years. Maybe this is more critical so that I can relieve some time for you to do the things that we feel are most important. And we're getting lots of feedback from staff and understanding how are we utilizing our dollars in a more effective way. So Suresh, you might want to talk a little bit about not deferring the tuition freeze and why we decided that was so important to keep the tuition freeze in place.
Thank you, Patty. As I think you all know, this has been I've been quite consistent on this front. Even the strategic imperatives document, which I hope you've all read, because it is what I see as a vehicle for us to look to the future, to a better future, to sort of focus on as we come out of this COVID challenge. And so I think that strategic imperatives plan, which we are calling Amplifying Our Impact, is quite thoughtfully put together. We got 1,200 responses from campus within 2 days. So the tuition freeze recognize that access and affordability are extremely central issues for our students and families. They were even before the pandemic. I think that, thank God we did it. We took that decision back in October, because had we not, we would have had to take it on short notice. You're all facing hardship. Every family and every student's families are facing the same hardships, and the situation is exacerbated even more than it was before, of trillions of dollars of student debt. So we need to be sensitive to this now more than ever. We're the 4th highest costing public institution in the US. This is not a record we should be proud of, or we can be proud of. Part of it comes, of course, from the fact that the state government does not put in very much money into our pot. But be that as it may, our demographics are such that things aren't going to change a lot on that front. We were ahead of most institutions in not increasing tuition prior to the pandemic to be responsive to this growing challenge in our families. We are, I think, at a price point where our cost can be seen increasingly in challenging times as outweighing our value. And so, and you should know also that since the pandemic, many institutions have now chosen not to increase tuition to be sensitive to the students and their families. I just read yesterday that one was actually cutting tuition. I wish we could. I don't think we're anywhere in a position to do that. But it's a very, very challenging time across the country. The students are why we're here. We need to make the education as high quality as possible and as affordable as possible within limits. And so I think it was the right decision.
Thanks, Suresh. Suresh, do you want to address the question about why construction is continuing on the athletic campus?
Yes, absolutely. So you know, if anyone missed it, the only construction work that's still underway is to address structural repair issues in the Gutterson and around Forbush. We'd already sort of borrowed funds and entered into contracts with the construction company and so on. So that's certainly proceeding, but construction of the new arena has been put on hold for now, along with the associated borrowing of additional dollars. The board asked us to defer any further borrowing so as not to incur the debt service costs, and therefore we're not doing that. We're just completing the kinds of contracts that we already had in place, and it'll effectively provide significantly more wellness and recreation and health space for our students, and they're paying for it, therefore they deserve to get that additional wellness space. But the arena has been put off and we're not borrowing further.
Thank you, Suresh. Okay, so that we can keep moving, there were about 11 questions related to the children's campus, Campus Children's School, and that clearly hit at the heart of many, many people. Again, timing couldn't be worse for many people when childcare is so difficult. We have a statewide national problem in childcare. People are interested in why the task group didn't happen before, what are we doing to help families, etc. So I'm going to just try and summarize where we're at and try and help people understand what has been done and what is being done. So the work group, people ask what is going to be the purpose. Their task is really to explore this issue really at a comprehensive level and develop a long-term strategy. In the short term, both Dean Scott in the College of Education and Social Services as Dean, Jess Krause in his office in HR, and Barbara Barrington, who was the director of the Children's Campus School, is connecting employees with other resources to address some short-term needs, recognizing it is not easy because everyone is accessing childcare and there's such a limitation. I think there were several issues that affected the CCS and they had to be addressed immediately for several reasons. The Campus Children's School had been in financial trouble for the last several years, and someone asked about the IBB costs, and those were actually just what is associated with the university to account for that space and utilities. So we have to pay for that space, keeping the electricity on, the water, etc. Additionally, the budget shortfall was actually much more significant than that simple space cost. It really was taking into account all the personnel costs, so it was an unsustainable situation. I think then the pandemic exacerbated the situation, but the underlying problems had to be addressed regardless. The pandemic also made it impossible to reopen. We could not get approval for that space for children and their families. We would not, if we tried, we would maybe be able to put in 12 families instead of the 55 who are currently there. They couldn't guarantee the safety in terms of air, etc. So that made it an impossible place. It's also, as you know, over by the Living and Learning Center, it's not the most safe place as it's right on a main street. So efforts were made by Dean Thomas for the last 3 years. He was working with community partners in Burlington and in Winooski, and those were just not successful. And when the pandemic happened, communication stopped. The other thing that people raised is, this is a great educational model for students. And yes, that would be true if that's the model they used. But in fact, for the last 10 years, it has not been an educational model because most of the education students are spending a lot of their time in more rural communities with a variety of diverse populations of children, and that's what they want for the experience. And then people raised an important point about the inclusivity and equity, and that was also a big concern. The CCS, although they were doing an amazing job for the people that they served, was not really serving the community in an inclusive way with the limited number of families served, and many of those for a specific population like faculty in the Larner College of Medicine or in education. The bigger issue is childcare is a societal problem. And in this state, it's an unbelievable problem. And so our closure, St. Mike's closure, and others has made childcare needs even more clear and gave us an opportunity to engage new people and new ideas so that we might consider some third-party vendors or some partnerships who are really committed to priority care. We need other partners to think outside of the box to try and find some solutions. And so there was a question about the CCS parents group and not responding. We actually did respond and said that we really wanted them to communicate directly with this working group because they're the experts in this area. Although I have some background in early childhood, that is not Suresh's forte. And we specifically put 4 staff who've had experience, including a parent, and 4 administrators who also have experience, and people who have experience with Let's Grow Kids and other vendors that we might be able to come up with some kind of partnership with the university. I think we need to, there was some concern that, the final recommendations aren't until December. We need to give them an opportunity to explore this fully and share their assessment. However, I met with Jess Krause, the chair, yesterday, and he already, they're having a meeting next week. He already has some ideas and communicating with community partners. So he's really excited about working with this group, and he knows that there's both a short-term urgent need that we will continue to try and work with people, but how can we make recommendations as soon as possible? This was one of our most difficult and painful decisions. It killed me because my focus is early childhood and kids with disabilities. So we are really working and hope to maybe even, not even at a practical level, but look at state policy level and what can we do from a research perspective to make changes at the state level. All right, that's a lot, but Gary, there were a number of questions. Suresh, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it is time, it's 11:45, and I think we've covered most of the questions that were asked. The ones that are left, the last category is on returning to campus. There are a number of questions, and obviously Gary is leading that whole effort with a lot of input from staff and faculty and students. We, as you know, we're putting as much effort and time into communicating these things with the community as possible. Gary led a group Teams Live meeting with staff, as you know, early on, as soon as the announcement came out. We're certainly planning another one. Gary will do the next one again with the staff. And we will do as many as needed as we go along. So I think that to not shortchange that area, it's obviously big. It's huge. We could give you quick answers, but I almost feel like Gary and Patty and I will talk about this and announce a time when we can have another Teams Live meeting, perhaps even next week, to address some of these quite fundamental issues. Please hear from me that we truly, truly do care about the 2 criteria that are driving us. One is the health and safety of our community. That means you. And providing the best quality of education we can. We're not going to shortchange that. We're going to be spending tens of millions of dollars to ensure the safety of our community, de-densify, all these kinds of things. I think you deserve a more detailed update on all that has happened since our first set of announcements. So Patty, I'm not sure if you think differently, but each of these needs careful responses. And anyway, I just wanted to point out that we're out of time and out of respect for the folks on the call as well. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I agree. We have 3 other broad categories that should be given sufficient time. Return to campus, issues of policy, and other components of how we're being trained in diversity and inclusiveness and transparency and going forward. Maybe we can talk about how we can reschedule, or we can schedule a further one. Gary and I can participate.
Yeah, Patty, I'd forgotten that there are 3 topics. So we don't need to decide online now, but when we schedule the meeting for the staff, the next one that Gary was sort of thinking about, perhaps you can join him and address the ones that we didn't get to today, right?
Yep.
The transparency issue, the diversity issue, these are extremely important to me. People may not have noticed, but I look different from many people in Vermont. It's truly, truly important to me, okay? And so I have personal commitment to this. I've worked very closely with Wanda, with the identity centers, with the PSI, the President's Commission. So it needs more time than we have now. I don't want to just check mark it. So let us port over the questions that we did not answer today into the next presentation, and with that, maybe stop that now. So Steve, I want to turn it over to you to handle or to take it to a close.
Okay, thank you, President Garamella. Thank you, Provost Prelock. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you taking the time to address the questions that we had for you. We will reach out and try to coordinate a second one of these to discuss some of the other issues that we didn't get to today. So we look forward to our next meeting and continuing the conversation around the issues that are at the forefront of everybody's minds currently.
Thank you, Steve.
So thank you all for joining us, spending this time. I hope that you're able to share these responses, these ideas, and the fact that we're truly trying our best, even though there's hardship that is created, and we will continue to do our best to communicate. So please expect a call, not just with staff council, but with staff at large from Gary and with Patty joining very soon. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.